When I first met her, I knew she had 3 children. I knew they were not mine, and I knew that if I stayed, my life would never be simple. What I did not know was that those 3 children would eventually become the center of my entire world. She never tried to hide the truth from me. Their father had been gone from their lives for years, and she was doing everything she could to keep the family together. I remember meeting the children for the first time. The oldest was cautious, watching me carefully as if he was trying to understand why this stranger was suddenly sitting at their kitchen table. The middle child barely spoke. The youngest was the only one who seemed completely comfortable, asking me questions without hesitation. I understood something that evening. If I wanted a future with their mother, I couldn't treat her children like an inconvenience attached to the relationship. They were part of her life, and eventually, they would have to become part of mine. I didn't make some dramatic promise that night. I simply started showing up. At first, it was small things. Helping with homework. Fixing a broken bicycle. Driving them to school when their mother was working. Sitting through school performances even when I had no idea what was happening on stage. Buying birthday presents and remembering which child liked what. Slowly, the distance between us disappeared. One evening, the youngest fell asleep in the back seat while I was driving home. When we arrived, I carried him inside because I didn't want to wake him. As I placed him on the couch, he opened his eyes and whispered, "Are you staying?" I remember that question because it changed something inside me. He wasn't asking whether I was staying for the night. He was asking whether I was staying in their lives. I looked at him and said, "Yes." And I meant it. From that moment forward, I stopped thinking of myself as a man dating a woman with 3 children. I started thinking of us as a family. There were difficult years. Money was sometimes tight. I worked longer hours than I wanted to. There were weekends when I had to choose between something I wanted for myself and something one of the children needed. I never considered those choices sacrifices at the time. They were simply decisions you make when you love someone. The children grew older. Their needs changed. School expenses became larger. Then came sports, college plans, first cars, heartbreaks, and all the complicated moments that come with growing up. And through all of it, I stayed. I wasn't their biological father. I never pretended to be. But I was the man who answered the phone when they were afraid. I was the man sitting in the hospital waiting room. I was the man standing in the doorway when they came home late. I was the man who celebrated their victories and quietly helped them through their failures. For 22 years, I believed that was enough. I believed family was built through presence, patience, and love, not through DNA. I had no idea that one day, the woman who had walked away from those children would return. And when she did, she wouldn't come back asking how they were. She would come back asking what belonged to her. For 22 years, I never kept a list of everything I had done for those children. I never added up the school fees, the medical bills, the clothes, the birthdays, the late-night drives, or the countless small expenses that slowly became the foundation of their lives. If someone had asked me how much I had spent raising them, I honestly wouldn't have known. Because I never thought of them as an expense. They were my children. The oldest was the first to start becoming independent. I still remember the day he came home with his college acceptance letter. He stood in the doorway, trying to hide his excitement, but I could see it immediately. I got in. I hugged him before he could say anything else. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table looking at the tuition numbers. They were far more than I had expected. I had been saving, but not enough to cover everything comfortably. I had dreams of my own back then. A better car. A larger house. Maybe a business I had always wanted to start. But those dreams could wait. His future couldn't. So I worked more. The same thing happened with the other 2. The middle child needed help during a difficult period at school. The youngest struggled with confidence and needed someone to believe in him when he didn't believe in himself. I was there for both of them. There were nights when I came home exhausted and still sat at the kitchen table helping with homework. There were mornings when I drove across town because someone had forgotten something important. There were weekends I spent repairing things around the house instead of resting. None of it felt extraordinary. It was simply what a parent did. The children eventually stopped calling me by the careful name they had used when I first entered their lives. Somewhere along the way, without any announcement or ceremony, I became dad. The first time one of them called me that, I didn't correct them. I just smiled. That single word meant more to me than anything money could ever buy. Their mother was still part of their story, but her presence became less important as the years passed. She had chosen distance, and I had chosen to stay. I never poisoned the children's minds against her. Whenever they asked about her, I tried to answer honestly without turning my pain into their burden. I wanted them to make their own decisions about her. Maybe that was another mistake. Maybe I was too forgiving. But at the time, I believed protecting the children mattered more than being recognized for what I had done. As the years passed, my financial situation improved. I worked hard, saved carefully, and eventually built a comfortable life. The house became bigger. The children became adults. One by one, they moved out and started building lives of their own. The house became quieter. Sometimes I would walk through the hallway and see old photographs hanging on the walls. Graduation pictures. Birthday pictures. Family vacations. Moments I had almost forgotten. And I would smile. I had given 22 years of my life to raising children who weren't biologically mine. But I didn't regret a single day. I thought the hardest part was over. I thought I was finally going to enjoy the peaceful life I had earned. Then, one afternoon, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was one I hadn't heard properly in years. It was their mother. And after everything she had said, after all those years of silence, there was one question that stayed in my mind. Why now? The call came on an ordinary afternoon, which somehow made it feel even more unsettling. I was sitting alone at the kitchen table when my phone rang. I almost ignored it. I didn't recognize the number, but something made me answer. Hello? There was silence for a moment. Then I heard her voice. It had been years since I had heard it. She said my name quietly, almost as if she was afraid I would hang up. I knew immediately who it was. Their mother. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then she started talking about the children. She asked how they were doing. Whether they were married. Where they lived. What they were doing with their lives. I answered carefully. I didn't know what she expected from me, but I didn't want to turn the conversation into an argument. After all, despite everything that had happened, she was still their biological mother. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. I've made mistakes. Those 4 words stayed with me. I had spent 22 years watching 3 children grow up without their mother. I had seen them wonder why she wasn't there for birthdays, graduations, illnesses, and all the ordinary moments that parents are supposed to share. Now she was telling me she regretted it. Part of me wanted to believe her. Maybe people really could change. Maybe time had finally made her understand what she had lost. I told her that if she genuinely wanted to reconnect with the children, I wouldn't stand in her way. She sounded relieved. Over the next few weeks, she started contacting them directly. At first, the children were confused. The oldest was skeptical. The middle child didn't know how to respond emotionally. The youngest, who had always remembered her more clearly, was the most willing to give her a chance. I stayed out of it. I didn't tell them what to think. I didn't remind them of all the years she had been absent. I wanted them to have the opportunity to know their mother without my bitterness influencing them. Eventually, she came to visit. When she stood at my front door, I barely recognized the woman from my memories. She looked older, of course. We both did. She smiled and said she wanted to make things right. I invited her inside. We sat in the living room where countless family memories had been created. She looked around at the photographs on the walls. There were pictures of the children as babies, teenagers, graduates, and adults. She studied them quietly. Then she asked about the house. I thought nothing of it. She asked when I had bought it. I answered. She asked whether I still had the same job. I answered that too. Then she started asking about my savings. That question caught me off guard. I looked at her. Why do you want to know? She laughed nervously and changed the subject. I told myself I was being suspicious for no reason. Maybe she was simply trying to understand the life she had missed. But over the next several visits, the questions continued. What did the house cost? Did I own other property? Had I invested money? What would happen to everything if something happened to me? The questions became more specific. And suddenly, the story I had been telling myself began to feel different. Maybe she hadn't returned only because she missed her children. Maybe there was another reason. I didn't want to believe it. After 22 years of raising those children, I had learned to recognize pain, fear, and dishonesty. And for the first time since her return, something inside me whispered that I needed to be careful. Because she wasn't asking what she had missed. She was asking what I had built. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It came in small pieces, each one harder to ignore than the last. At first, I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things. Maybe after 22 years away, she simply wanted to understand the life her children had grown up in. Maybe asking about my house and finances was her awkward way of catching up. But then the questions became more direct. One evening, she asked me whether I had made a will. I stared at her. Why would you ask me that? She shrugged and said she was only curious. But I wasn't convinced. A few days later, she brought up the house again. She wanted to know whose name was on the property documents. Then she asked whether I had other savings and investments. At that point, I finally understood something I had been refusing to admit. She wasn't simply interested in rebuilding a relationship. She was interested in what I had accumulated. 22 years earlier, she had left 3 children behind. I had stayed. I had paid the bills, worked extra hours, sacrificed opportunities, and built a stable life around those children. Now that the children were adults and I had something to show for those years, she had suddenly returned. And she seemed to believe that she had a claim to it. The conversation that finally exposed everything happened during a family dinner. All 3 children were there. She waited until everyone was comfortable before saying she believed it was time to discuss the future. I immediately knew what she meant. She started talking about how the family should be fair to everyone. Then she mentioned the house. The room became silent. One of the children looked at her and asked what she meant. She said she was their mother and that she had sacrificed too. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. I looked at my children. They were adults now, but in that moment I could see the confusion on their faces. They remembered who had been there. They remembered who hadn't. Their mother tried to explain that she had made mistakes when she was younger. She said she had struggled. She said circumstances had forced her to leave. I listened quietly. But then she said something that changed everything. She suggested that because she was their biological mother, she deserved consideration when it came to the family's financial future. That was when the oldest finally spoke. You weren't there. She became defensive. He continued. You missed everything. He didn't. The middle child started crying. The youngest looked at me and said something I will never forget. You were the one who raised us. Their mother became angry. She accused me of turning the children against her. I told her I had never done that. For 22 years, I had protected her from their anger. I had never told them every painful detail. I had never made them choose. But now they were old enough to see the truth for themselves. She had come back expecting the family she abandoned to welcome her with open arms. And perhaps she expected the life I had built to be waiting for her too. But money can reveal intentions that words try to hide. She wasn't asking for forgiveness anymore. She was demanding recognition. And for the first time, I realized that protecting my family didn't mean remaining silent. Sometimes, protecting the people you love means finally telling the truth. The children didn't need me to tell them who their real parent was. They already knew. They had lived the answer for 22 years. The room stayed silent after the argument. Nobody seemed to know what to say next. Their mother was standing across from us, angry and hurt, insisting that she had been misunderstood. She said she had made mistakes, but that didn't make her a bad mother. She reminded the children that she had given birth to them, that she had loved them in her own way, and that she deserved a place in their lives. I didn't interrupt her. For the first time in 22 years, I decided that I didn't need to defend myself. The children were old enough to decide what the truth meant to them. The oldest looked at her and asked a simple question. "Where were you?" She didn't answer immediately. He continued. "Where were you when I graduated? Where were you when I was sick? Where were you when I needed someone to teach me how to drive? Where were you when I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life?" She tried to explain. But explanations couldn't erase 22 years. The middle child began remembering things too. She talked about the nights she had cried over heartbreak and the person who had stayed beside her until she could breathe again. She looked at me. He never left. The youngest wiped his eyes. "You missed our childhood," he said. "He lived it with us." Their mother finally became quiet. I could see that she understood she had lost control of the story. For years, perhaps she had believed that being their biological mother would always give her a permanent place in their hearts. But biology could create a connection. It could never replace presence. I told the children that I didn't want them to hate her. That surprised them. I said she was still their mother, and they had every right to have whatever relationship with her they wanted. But I also told them something I had learned during those 22 years. Love isn't proven by what someone says they feel. It is proven by what they are willing to do when nobody is watching. I had never raised those children expecting anything in return. Not money. Not gratitude. Not even the title of dad. I simply loved them. And that was why, when they eventually chose to stand beside me, I didn't feel victorious. I felt relieved. The financial issue was eventually settled. I protected what I had worked for, not because I wanted to punish their mother, but because I understood that boundaries were necessary. The house remained mine. The savings remained mine. But the most valuable thing I had built couldn't be measured in dollars. It was the family standing in that room. Years later, the children still came to visit. We sat around the same table where so many arguments and celebrations had happened. Sometimes we laughed about their childhood memories. Sometimes they reminded me of things I had completely forgotten. One evening, the youngest asked me whether I ever regretted staying all those years. I smiled. No. He asked why. I looked at the three people sitting around me and finally understood something I had known all along. They were never his three kids. They were my children. Maybe not by blood, but by every late-night conversation, every sacrifice, every school morning, every hospital visit, every birthday, every mistake forgiven, and every moment I chose to stay. Their mother had given them life. But I had spent 22 years helping them build one. And when she came back for what I had built, she discovered something money could never take away. A family is not defined by who arrives first. It is defined by who stays until the end.